That's not what it says. The words sliced through the air like a bullet. Conversation died. Crystal glasses hovered, untouched. Every face around the massive dining table turned, some curious, some confused, some furious. The voice didn't come from a lawyer. Not a board member. Not a translator. Not a stakeholder. It came from the corner of the room, where the help stands. Layla Brooks stood still, her right hand clutching a silver tray of unopened wine bottles. Her posture perfect, her eyes locked on the sleek folder of documents that had just been passed to the Japanese guest of honor. The folder that held a $500 million deal. The folder that held a lie. And she had just exposed it. Layla wasn't supposed to speak. She knew that. Everyone knew that. She was there to serve, silently, swiftly, invisibly. But when your grandfather teaches you a language most people don't expect you to know, and your mother raises you to never stay quiet when something feels wrong, you don't just stand there. You say it. Even when it's going to shake the room to its foundation. You said the translation was identical, she added, her voice steady but not loud. But the Japanese version says something else. Something dangerous. Across the table sat Bryant Maxwell, America's favorite finance mogul. Sharp jaw, silk suit, teeth like white gold. He laughed for magazine covers and got invited to speak at Ivy League schools. The man had power, money, and charm. But what he didn't have, in that moment, was control. Because a waitress had just dismantled him with a sentence. And this wasn't just a corporate scandal waiting to happen. This was a black story, one about silence, truth, and the strength of someone the world thought would never speak up. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in justice that doesn't wear a tie, stick around. Hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always powerful to see how far the truth travels. Because tonight, in a room full of money and arrogance, one young black woman reminded the world that integrity doesn't need an invitation. Let's take it from the top. This is how it happened. Layla Brooks was used to being underestimated. At 24, she had the kind of beauty that turned heads. Smooth brown skin, warm almond eyes, a graceful walk that made her movements feel like poetry. But in the white tablecloth world of high-end dining, all they saw was a uniform. All they heard was silence. She worked at Velvet Ivy, a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan where meals cost rent money and smiles were polished to perfection. The kind of place where celebrities dined without being bothered, where deals were whispered over Wagyu beef, and where someone like Layla was expected to be helpful, invisible, and absolutely replaceable. She learned quickly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Keep your tone friendly but not familiar. If a guest says something rude, laugh it off. If they call you girl instead of your name, let it slide. When a man in a $3,000 suit snaps his fingers at you, smile like it's a compliment. And the compliments came, dressed like daggers. You're so well spoken, one guest had said, clearly surprised. You have such nice features for a black girl, another whispered, as if it were a favor. One night, a tech bro from Silicon Valley leaned in and said, you'd be perfect for a music video. Ever consider modeling? Layla had smiled, nodded, and walked away, every time. But she remembered. She remembered the way their eyes flicked over her like she was a character they had already written. Not someone smart, or sharp, or multilingual. Not someone with a college degree and a gift for language. Just a pretty face in a world that saw color before character. They didn't know she spoke Japanese fluently. They didn't know her grandfather had served in World War II and taught her the language as a way to honor the people he once fought against. He used to tell her, understanding another man's language is how you truly understand his heart. She had studied quietly, privately, with books, podcasts, old military letters. Not for a job. Not for show. For herself. So no, Layla wasn't just the help. And the world was about to find that out. Because when the truth finally cracks the surface, it usually comes from the place you least expect. And on that night, it came from the girl in the white apron holding a tray of wine. The one they all forgot to fear. Bryant Maxwell did not walk into a room. He conquered it. At least, that's what he believed. And for the most part, the world let him. Tonight was no different. The private dining hall at Velvet Ivy had been cleared for a special event. One long mahogany table. 12 leather chairs. White orchids in tall vases. Everything curated, right down to the jazz trio in the corner playing just loud enough to be impressive, but not loud enough to interrupt a deal. Maxwell entered with his entourage, 2 lawyers, 1 translator, and his executive assistant who never looked up from her iPad. He wore a navy custom suit that probably cost more than Layla's entire annual rent. His tie was red. Always red. Power color. Sharp, deliberate, calculated. He was the kind of man who smiled only when he knew he was winning. To the world, Bryant Maxwell was a success story. Ivy League graduate. Forbes, 30 under 30. Self-made billionaire in fintech. A media darling with a trademark smirk and a Rolodex full of senators and CEOs. But behind closed doors, he was a different man. Colder. Sharper. Hungrier. Layla had seen him a few times before at the restaurant. He never remembered her. He never used names. Just snapped his fingers and said things like, sparkling water. Room temperature. Not cold. Tonight, he was hosting Kenji Nakamura, a quiet, reserved billionaire from Japan whose family's holding company controlled a vast network of logistics, real estate, and tech. A man with more legacy than flash. Maxwell wanted his money. The plan was simple. Charm Nakamura, translate the contract, close the deal, and walk away with a $500 million injection into Maxwell Capital's new Asia expansion. Everything had to go perfectly. The staff had been prepped for weeks. No slip-ups. No noise. No interruptions. Layla had been handpicked to serve wine and remain in the background. She had accepted without question. Extra hours meant extra tips, and her mother's medical bills were piling up. What Maxwell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tonight, the silence he demanded would finally speak back. Because in all his preparations, in all his arrogance, Bryant Maxwell forgot one simple thing. When you treat people like they don't matter, eventually, one of them reminds you that they do. For Bryant Maxwell, the $500 million deal wasn't about money. It was about legacy. He had already built a fortune. He had the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the private jet with custom leather seats, the $10,000 suits tailored in Italy. He didn't need more cash. What he wanted was something else. Respect. The kind of respect that only comes when your name is carved into the foundation of global finance. And for that, he needed Japan. Maxwell Capital had been struggling to break into the Asian market. Regulations were tight. Trust was slow. Competitors were fierce. But if he could bring Nakamura Holdings under his wing, he wouldn't just enter the market, he would own it. The only problem. Nakamura was cautious. He had built his empire slowly, methodically, over decades. He didn't believe in fast money or big promises. His lawyers wanted dual language contracts, reviewed line by line. Everything transparent. Everything equal. So Bryant did what he always did when faced with a roadblock. He found a shortcut. He hired a freelance translator, someone quiet, someone desperate, someone willing. The instructions were simple. Make the English version sound vague and open-ended, while the Japanese version locked in hard guarantees that favored Maxwell Capital in any downturn. Specifically, if the Asian market dropped more than 5%, even for reasons unrelated to their venture, Maxwell would gain temporary administrative control over Nakamura's US-based assets. Temporary, of course, was never defined. Control, however, was. It was legal sleight of hand. Just enough ambiguity to slide past the American lawyers. Just enough precision to trap Nakamura. Bryant paid the translator a bonus. $20,000 in cash. It's just protective language, he said. He'll never read it. They trust the English version anyway. The documents were printed on thick ivory paper. bound in leather, weighted, professional, impressive. Bryant had them delivered to the restaurant that afternoon. He would present them after dessert. The contract was the final course in a carefully choreographed performance. What he didn't count on, what he never imagined, was that the one person who would actually read the Japanese version would be the server bringing the wine. And she wouldn't just read it. She would understand it fluently. And she would know, instantly, that this wasn't a business deal. It was a setup, a trap, a betrayal disguised in ink and politeness. And she would say the one thing he never expected to hear. That's not what it says. The evening had been polished to perfection, until the moment cracked. Layla moved with the grace of someone who had mastered invisibility. She floated between tables, refilling glasses, responding to subtle nods, and anticipating every need before a word was spoken. She had done this 100 times. 1,000. She had learned how to disappear in plain sight. But some people never let you forget who they think you are. As she approached the main table, one of Bryant's guests, an investor from Dallas, maybe mid-50s, heavy gold watch, louder than necessary, looked her up and down with a smirk. His voice was just loud enough to travel across the table. "She walks like she's auditioning for a music video," he said, chuckling. Another man chimed in, "But she doesn't even know where Japan is on the map." Bryant laughed, not kindly, just the help. "She's not here to think. She's here to pour." Layla kept moving, face blank, eyes forward. She had trained herself not to react. She had told herself that silence was strength. But then she saw it, the contract. It was open on the table in front of Mr. Nakamura. Her eyes scanned the Japanese text, and one line pulled her in. A word she hadn't seen since her grandfather taught her to read old letters from the war. She froze. Time folded in on itself. Her breath caught. And then, for the first time in her life, she broke the rule. "That's not what it says." The words left her mouth before she had time to question them. Bryant's head whipped toward her, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" he asked, voice low but sharp. The table went silent. Layla stepped forward. "The Japanese clause, it says something very different from the English. It's not just a translation issue. It's misleading." Bryant stood, his chair scraping the floor. His tone dropped an octave. "You are a waitress. That's all. You pour wine and keep quiet. Don't pretend to know more than you do." Another guest scoffed. "Is she seriously trying to play lawyer right now?" "I'm not playing anything," Layla said, steady now. "I'm telling the truth." Bryant's face flushed deep red. "Get back to the kitchen. Now. Or you're done here. You understand me?" Layla's eyes didn't move. She looked past Bryant, straight at Mr. Nakamura. That was when the air shifted. The balance of the room had changed. Because one voice, in the right moment, can cut through power like a blade. And this black woman, this server, this invisible somebody. She was no longer invisible. The room held its breath. Layla stood still, her hands empty now, the tray of wine forgotten on a side table. Every eye was on her, some amused, some annoyed, most confused. Bryant Maxwell was still fuming, pacing like a caged animal. "She's out of line," he barked. "Someone remove her." But Mr. Nakamura hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on the table, eyes calm but focused. He tilted his head, studying Layla, not with judgment but curiosity, and then he spoke. In Japanese. A single question. Gentle, respectful. "What exactly did you read?" Layla inhaled slowly. This was the moment, the one her grandfather always talked about. The moment where you either stay silent or step forward. So she answered. In fluent, formal Japanese. "Sumimasen, Nakamura-sama," she began softly, bowing her head with sincere respect. "Watashi wa kono shogai o yurishimasen." Translation. "Excuse me, Mr. Nakamura. I cannot ignore this deception. The effect was instant. The interpreter, hired by Bryant, looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. The lawyers froze. Bryant's face shifted from anger to confusion, then disbelief. She continued, her pronunciation crisp and intentional. Her tone was modest but unshakable. The clause in paragraph 7, she said, gesturing toward the document. It states that in the event of a 5% market fluctuation, all Nakamura Holdings assets on U.S. soil will transfer into the administrative control of Maxwell Capital. She paused. That is not what the English version says. Mr. Nakamura raised an eyebrow. Bryant finally found his voice. She's lying. She's trying to show off. She can't possibly. But Nakamura raised a hand. Just a quiet motion. And Bryant went silent. Derejie anata enai nihongo o ashieta no desu ka? Nakamura asked. Who taught you Japanese? Layla smiled, a small one. My grandfather, she replied in his language. He fought in the war. Afterward, he taught me Japanese so I could understand more than just history. He said, to know a people, you must learn their words. Nakamura looked down at the contract again. His expression didn't change, but the energy in the room did. It no longer belonged to Bryant. It belonged to Layla and the truth. A truth wrapped in a language no one expected her to know, and a voice no one had expected to speak. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of luxury or ceremony. It was the kind of silence that comes right before the ground splits open. Bryant Maxwell's face had gone pale. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a twisted attempt at control. His voice, when it returned, was sharp and venomous. This is nonsense, he spat. She's a waitress. A pretty face with a good memory. She's twisting the language. He turned toward his translator, a man in his 30s, nervous, sweating through his collar. Tell everyone the translation is accurate. But the translator didn't move. All eyes landed on him now, his hands trembling at his sides, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Tjerk, Bryant snapped. Say it. Right now. Clark swallowed hard. Then, finally, he spoke. I can't. Bryant's jaw tightened. What do you mean you can't? Clark's voice cracked. She's right. A ripple moved through the table. Mr. Nakamura didn't flinch. He simply waited. Clark continued, each word heavier than the last. Mr. Maxwell paid me $20,000 to modify the Japanese version of the contract. He said it was just a precaution. That the Japanese side wouldn't check it. That the English version was what really mattered. He looked directly at Mr. Nakamura. I'm sorry. I knew it was wrong. But I needed the money. Bryant exploded. You coward. You were paid to protect our interests. You think I won't destroy you for this? You'll never work again. Clark didn't respond. He just sat down, hollow, ashamed. And for once, Bryant's rage didn't land. No one was listening anymore. The illusion had shattered. The room full of investors and executives had seen it for what it was, deception. Not a deal. Not a business plan. Just greed, dressed in expensive tailoring. Mr. Nakamura turned his gaze back to Layla. His tone was even. You spoke when others stayed silent, he said softly. That is not weakness. That is honor. Bryant tried one last time. Kenji, wait. This is all overblown. We can fix it. Just give me a chance to explain. But Nakamura had already stood. He wasn't interested in explanations. He was interested in truth. And he had already heard it, from the only voice in the room that mattered. The storm had passed, but the air still crackled with something electric. Mr. Nakamura stood now, the quiet dignity of his posture making the room feel smaller. The translator had fallen silent. Bryant Maxwell stood off to the side, red-faced, lips pressed into a bitter line. His empire had just cracked, but the man still couldn't understand why. Layla stood her ground. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her heart was still pounding, but her voice had never been clearer. Mr. Nakamura walked slowly toward her, not with force, but with calm, measured steps. He stopped a few feet away, bowed his head respectfully, and spoke, this time, in English. "You speak my language very well," he said gently. Layla offered a small smile. "Thank you. My grandfather taught me. He said you can't truly understand someone until you understand their words." Nakamura nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Your grandfather must be a very wise man. May I ask his name?" "Henry Brooks," she said, the name catching in her throat for a moment. "He served in the Pacific during World War II. After the war, he never forgot the people he met." A long pause followed. Nakamura's eyes grew distant, as if a memory had just stepped forward out of time. "My grandfather," he said quietly, "was a young conscript during the war. He told a story, just one, of an American soldier who saved him, pulled him from the wreckage of a collapsed farmhouse, shared water, shared a piece of chocolate, couldn't speak his language, but treated him like a brother. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small, time-worn photograph. He unfolded it with care. This is that soldier," he said, handing it to Layla. She looked down and gasped. There, in black and white, was a young black man in uniform, sitting beside a wounded Japanese soldier. They both looked tired, but they were smiling. And she recognized that face. The jawline, the calm eyes. Her grandfather. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Henry." Mr. Nakamura bowed his head again. "Then today," he said softly, "my family finally repays a 70-year debt." And in that moment, it wasn't about business. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about legacy. Two families, once connected by war, now reunited by truth, and the courage of a granddaughter who chose to speak. The room felt completely still, as if the world outside had paused to make space for something sacred. Layla held the photograph in her hands, her fingertips gently brushing the worn edges. It was old, faded, but the story it told was ageless. Two young men, from two different worlds, sitting in the ruins of war. Her grandfather, Henry Brooks, with dirt on his face and peace in his eyes. And the man beside him, Satoru Nakamura, Kenji's grandfather, looking just as young, just as weary, and just as human. Mr. Nakamura was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, not to the room, but to Layla. "My grandfather carried that photograph with him every day of his life," he said. "He said it reminded him that even in war, kindness exists. Even between enemies. That photo, it was his reminder of humanity." Layla blinked back tears. "He never talked about that day. But I always felt like something changed him in the war. He didn't carry anger. He carried perspective." Mr. Nakamura nodded slowly. "My family searched for your grandfather after the war. Letters were sent, but none ever returned. We didn't know if he had survived. We never had a chance to thank him. Until now." He stepped closer, his tone more personal than ever. "Tonight, you honored him by honoring the truth. What you did, it was not just brave. It was sacred." He turned to the silent guests still seated at the table, many of whom were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure what they had just witnessed. "This is not about business anymore," he said clearly. "This is about a debt. A debt of honor passed from one generation to the next. And tonight, we pay it forward." Layla lowered her gaze, humbled. "I didn't do it for anything. I knew it wasn't right." "That," Nakamura said, smiling softly, "is exactly why it matters." And suddenly, the girl who had been laughed at just an hour ago, the one dismissed as just a waitress, had become the most respected person in the room. Because true honor isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply shows up, when the world least expects it, and it speaks. Not for recognition, but because silence would be worse. Bryant Maxwell had built an empire on confidence, charm, and control. But on that night, all three left him. As Mr. Nakamura walked away from the table, the deal died, publicly, completely, and without hesitation. The other guests, once eager to shake hands and toast champagne, suddenly couldn't make eye contact. Some stood awkwardly. Others fumbled for their phones. No one spoke to Bryant, because they all knew what was coming. The story broke within 48 hours. A leaked recording. A translated contract. A transcript of Layla's exact words, word for word. The Japanese press ran with it first, calling it a disgrace of diplomacy. Then the American media followed, labeling it a scandal of corporate greed. The headlines were brutal. CEO accused of fraud in $500 million deal. Waitress exposes deception. Interpreter confirms bribe. Japanese investor walks from Maxwell Capital. That's not what it says. A black server brings down a billionaire. Stockholders reacted instantly. Maxwell Capital's stock dropped 22% in one day. Within a week, it had lost nearly half its value. Board members convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Bryant as CEO. He was escorted out of the building 2 days later. No press conference. No farewell speech. Just a man in an overpriced suit walking through a silent lobby, with no one left to applaud him. Federal investigators opened a formal inquiry into Maxwell Capital's foreign business practices. Clark, the translator, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Internal emails surfaced. The bribe was confirmed. So was the intent to deceive. Bryant hired lawyers. But no firm with a respectable reputation wanted his name on their books. The investors he once called friends? Gone. The politicians he used to host at charity dinners? Stopped returning his calls. Even Velvet Ivy, the restaurant he'd frequented for years, quietly banned his name from the reservation list. He had not just lost money. He had lost what money could never buy back: trust, reputation, and the illusion of being untouchable. Bryant Maxwell didn't go to prison. At least, not yet. But in a world built on perception, the fall from grace was punishment all its own. And every time someone repeated those 5 words, "That's not what it says," his legacy crumbled a little more. For the first time in years, Layla and her mother, Gloria, woke up without fear. No eviction notices taped to the door. No final notice bills stacked on the kitchen table. No cold pit in the stomach, wondering if the lights would stay on for another month. The fallout from that night had rippled far beyond the dining room. A week after the story broke, Mr. Nakamura personally called Layla. Not an assistant. Not a representative. The man himself. He thanked her again, for her courage, for her integrity, for protecting the honor of his family's name. Then he made an offer that left her speechless. The Nakamura Foundation, a global nonprofit dedicated to education and legacy building, would provide Layla with a full academic scholarship. Any university in the world. Any program. Tuition, housing, living expenses, completely covered. But that wasn't all. He also offered her mother a position in the foundation's New York office. A full-time role with benefits, working in community outreach. Not as a cleaner. Not as support staff. As a valued member of a team. Gloria wept when she heard the news. For decades, she had worked other people's dreams, cleaning their homes, raising their children, ironing their shirts. She had done it all without complaint, because that's what survivors do. But no one had ever handed her anything more than a tip and a thank you. Now, for the first time, she wasn't just earning a paycheck. She was building a future, with her daughter, not for someone else's. They moved into a new apartment on the Upper West Side. It wasn't flashy, but it was theirs. 2 bedrooms, lots of sunlight, and a tiny balcony where Gloria grew herbs in ceramic pots. Layla had her own room, her own desk, her own space to dream. She applied to Columbia University, majoring in international relations. Her application included a personal essay titled Truth in Translation, a story about 5 words that changed her life. She got in. And every morning after that, as Layla walked past the gates of the university with her head held high and her books tucked under one arm, she remembered what her grandfather used to say. Sometimes the biggest wars are won without a weapon. Sometimes all it takes is one voice that refuses to stay quiet. On a quiet Sunday morning, Layla sat alone on the small balcony of their new apartment, a cup of tea warming her hands. The city buzzed below, cars passing, dogs barking, someone playing jazz from an open window. But in her little corner of the world, it was still. She held the photograph Mr. Nakamura had given her, the one of her grandfather and the Japanese soldier sitting side by side in a war-torn world. 2 men who should have been enemies, but chose something greater. Compassion. Humanity. And from that single act, decades ago, came everything. A family saved. A legacy honored. And a voice, hers, that had learned the most important lesson of all. Honor is not about titles. It's not about wealth, reputation, or fancy contracts printed on thick paper. Honor is what you do when no one's watching. When you speak up because the truth matters more than your comfort. When you help someone not because it benefits you, but because it's right. That's what her grandfather taught her. That's what her mother lived by. And that's what Layla had chosen to carry forward. In a world that still underestimates people like her, young, black, working class, Layla didn't shout to be heard. She just told the truth. And she let the truth do the talking. That truth destroyed a billionaire's empire and built a new future for her family. So, if this story moved you, if it made you think, or feel, or reflect, let us know where you're watching from. Your voice matters too. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to remember what honor really means. And if you're here for more than just headlines, if you're here for real stories, black stories, true stories, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because there's more where this came from. And in a world full of noise, we'll keep telling the stories that remind us all. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the most truth. And sometimes honor is everything.